Good morning. Week after week, we talk about Brexit as a Westminster drama. Cabals forming, knife-edge votes, muttering about party splits and resignations. But what if you are actually an exporter? Out there in the real economy, you have to make decisions about trading rules and tariffs. You have to send ships to the other side of the world, and you have no idea what is actually going to happen. For many of those people, the deadline has already passed. In the Commons, who is really listening? I'm joined by the boss of Airbus in the UK, Katherine Bennett. What is the outlook for her 14,000 employees? The Culture Secretary, Jeremy Wright, flying to the States tomorrow, but not to negotiate a trade deal, but for urgent talks with online companies touting dangerous content. Listening to that, a man with big economic plans of his own, but might Labour's John McDonnell have to revisit his strategy if we go through a no-deal exit? And as economists warn us about another looming global recession, I've been talking to David Suchet and Brendan Coyle about Arthur Miller's brilliant play dramatising the consequences of the Great Depression, The Price.
100, 200, 300, 400. Take my advice, buy her a nice fur coat, your troubles will be over.
I know all about it, come on.
Our news review today comes from the BBC's very own chief political correspondent, Vicki Young, Anushka Asthana of The Guardian and Camilla Tominey of The Telegraph. All of that and more coming up, but first, the news with Rachel Burden.
Good morning. President Trump has said Britain and other European allies should take back more than 800 Islamic State fighters captured in Syria and put them on trial. In a tweet, Donald Trump told the UK, France and Germany that the US would be forced to release the fighters unless they were taken into custody. Passengers stranded across Europe are trying to find alternative travel arrangements after the airline Fly BMI collapsed. The company has announced that it's filing for administration, leaving 376 employees at risk of redundancy. The East Midlands-based airline operated 17 planes flying to 25 European countries. Theresa May has written to all Conservative MPs, urging them to put aside personal preferences and support a Brexit deal in Parliament. The Prime Minister urges her party to come together and says history will judge us all. Theresa May says she will return to Brussels next week for further talks with the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. 9 miners working for an illegal company have been pulled alive from flooded mines in Zimbabwe. The men were rescued after becoming trapped on Tuesday when heavy rains flooded the mine shafts. More than 20 bodies have been recovered so far. The government has declared a national disaster. Videos and photographs promoting animal cruelty and illegal blood sports are being shared on social media, according to a BBC Countryfile investigation. Footage of hare coursing and cockfighting was discovered on social media platforms. Facebook and YouTube have taken down some of the videos. Well, that's all from me. The next news on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Back to you, Andrew.
Many thanks for that. And so to the front pages. There's The Observer. They've got a story about the Home Office hiring out people to chase down migrants, causing a lot of fuss about that. And also BMI, the airline which went under yesterday, blaming both Brexit and EU rules. Karl Marx defaced in Highgate there. There's the Sunday Times. The richest man in the UK, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, is moving to Monaco, taking a lot of taxation with him. That's going to be a story we'll be talking about. Meghan as well on the front page there. Sunday Telegraph. 800 jihadis ready to unleash terror on the West, it warns. And President Trump has been tweeting on the same subject. Again, we're going to be talking about that in a moment. The Mail on Sunday continues its assault on Jeremy Corbyn, in this case talking about a link to the Liverpool councillor who's been involved, or the Liverpool Labour Party member who's been involved in attacking Luciana Berger, verbally I should say. Much else to talk about, but let's start. Where should we start? I guess we have to start with the richest man in the country, who created his wealth from almost nothing by buying up and taking over chemical companies, created this company, Ineos, and now he's going to Monaco.
Yeah, you're right. So Sir Jim Ratcliffe, knighted, the richest man in the country, as you say, going to Monaco, and the Sunday Times suggesting in its splash that he could avoid up to £4 billion worth of tax. He's talking to PwC, the accountants, about that. He does pay a lot of tax in this country. What's really interesting about him is that he is a Brexiteer, and this comes after Sir James Dyson's decision to take his headquarters to Singapore. And I think there'll be real questions about what is driving those people to support Brexit in the first place. For example, just last week, Sir Jim Ratcliffe argued that he didn't like the EU because of its stupid green taxes, which he probably won't have to pay in Monaco. And people saying that, you know, Sir James Dyson going to Singapore, did he want a low-tax, low-spend economy? It wasn't exactly what was promised in the referendum.
I mean, he would say it's because that's where the big markets for his new car are. They're all the Far East markets, and the company's moving there anyway. But it's certainly the case. The big problem with avoiding that amount of tax is that you have to go and live in Monaco, which is possibly the dullest place on the planet.
Never been.
I've bypassed it. But anyway, as you point out, he does pay an awful lot of tax, so does INEOS. That is going to be talked about a lot, I think, over the next few days. John McDonnell, who's coming on the show, has been very outspoken in attacking that. Yeah,
John McDonnell in here. The greed of these super-rich tax avoiders seems to have no bounds.
Ooh. Now, we've mentioned the B word already, Camilla, but there's a very interesting story in The Sun, which hasn't got a lot of pick-up yet, but a very important story.
Another B word, Brexposed. We can add that to the Brexit lexicon in The Sun.
Yeah.
And this is essentially a story about EU Commission plans, secret plans that have been drawn up to basically allow planes to fly. You know, we had quite a lot of Project Fear statements about there'll be no planes in the sky and everyone will have to cancel their Easter holiday plans.
This is if it's a no-deal Brexit,
contingency
and it's
plan.
Also it allows lorries to rumble as now back and forward.
What's interesting about this is Chris Grayling, who hasn't had the best press lately, has repositioned himself in the cabinet as the kind of manager of no deal, and the Department for Transport's done quite a lot of work on this. So if you read this story, yes, we can take faith in that. So if we read this story, it's been welcomed by Dominic Raab, who's saying basically it's plans like this that suggest that Project Fear is completely overblown, and that all it is now for the UK to accept the EU's proposition that we should do this until an actually more concrete deal is signed. But if you're going on your Easter holidays after Brexit, you will be able to take to the skies, it seems.
Well, that's nice. Now, Shamima Begum, who's wanting to come back with her baby at the moment, every single newspaper, Vicki, has a story about it, a different line in every paper. Just talk us through. It's a real difficult human and moral dilemma.
It is. I think that's what's interesting about it, isn't it? Because she was 15 when she left. She was married within a couple of weeks, days when she got there. She's had 3 children, 2 of whom have died. And you can see here in the newspapers, the Sunday Mirror there saying there's no coming back from pure evil, making the case that she made this decision to go somewhere, that she's a sort of twisted fanatic, they call her. But others, of course, saying the possibility of redemption is central to a humane society. That's in the Observer, saying that Britain can't just wash its hands of citizens, and actually she should be allowed to come back here, and yes, she has to go through due process and go through any legal process that there might be, but it's incredibly important that Britain doesn't just abandon her, and of course the child that is about to be born in the next few days.
Well, and we don't know, do we, whether this child is actually a British citizen or not. That seems to be a legal
it seems to be
unknown area.
Conundrum. I think also Shamima's parents have said we will look after the baby. I think it's difficult to look at this as such a moral maze, because also from a kind of feminist perspective, you look at it and you see this girl who was educated well, she was a very bright girl at Bethnal Green Academy. She goes off and within 10 days she's married to a jihadist, and she's had 3 children, 2 unfortunately have died. This is the story about, at the end of it, a vulnerable female. She's made many, many mistakes, but it's concerning from that perspective what might happen to her as a mother.
But she hasn't really repudiated Islamic State, has she? She's been quite clear that
she seemed completely desensitised when she was interviewed by the Times, didn't she?
She sort of
which is part of the reason why you are getting these very, very different views across the place. I mean, it's quite interesting. You mentioned the tweet from the President of the United States earlier, because there's a kind of wider issue here, which is we believe that IS is about to fall, and there is a real question about what happens to all the people who have gone to Syria from all over the world, having been radicalised, to fight for them.
800 fighters, says the Sunday Telegraph. Yeah. And talk us through the Trump tweet, because this is important this morning.
Yeah, because so what the President is saying is the United States is asking Britain, France, Germany and other European allies to take back over 800 ISIS fighters that we captured in Syria and put them on trial. The caliphate is ready to fall. The alternative is not a good one, in that we will be forced to release them. And that is one of the really difficult questions, which is who is responsible for these people and where and how can they be be tried. And Britain, I understand, has been one of the countries that has been least willing to take people back and put them on trial.
The Home Secretary
because
Sajid
they're
Javid was
worried.
very clear, saying actually in the case of Shamima that he didn't feel that she should be allowed back in.
But then the question is, whose responsibility are those people?
And in quite a lot of cases, they're children. That's the other issue.
And evidentially, it's almost impossible to prove exactly how she might be tried under the Terrorism Act. What has she actually physically done? She's conspired, but...
So there are legal problems, there are clearly security issues, because some of these people are genuinely very dangerous indeed, and there's presumably financial issues. If that actually happened, we'd probably have to build another prison to put people into. I mean, it's a very, very expensive thing to do, but Trump is clear, if you don't, we will release them and then see what happens.
And it's interesting as to whether the authorities here and politicians here have thought about what they're going to do about this, because we know that ISIS, there's been the battles going on, and we know that they have been on the run, as it were, and this was very, very likely to happen, but there doesn't seem to be any clear indication of whether politicians here have thought through what they're going to do.
And the point about the children is really important. There are large numbers of children, not with the kind of ethical questions that you get in the Shamima case, children who were born to fighters in Syria, who are in these camps. I mean, we did a story very recently about 2 little children from Trinidad who were rescued by their mum. One of them was 3 when they were taken to Syria. And those are the type of children we also have to ask questions about whether we take back.
Now, let's turn to the front page of the Mail on Sunday, Vicky. I think the word is snotty about the first version of this story a week ago. Now they're looking at Jeremy Corbyn's links with an alleged anti-Semite or somebody who's been accused of that.
Yeah.
What do you make of it? There's lots of pages inside as well.
I mean, there are pages and pages of this, but this is about links between Jeremy Corbyn, apparently, and a man called Alex Scott Samuel, who is accused of being one of those who has been verbally attacking Luciana Berger. Now, she is the MP in Liverpool. She's had a very torrid time. She's about to give birth. But it seems that the link is that they once met. And it doesn't go much further than that.
He, and I'm sure members of the Labour leadership would say, this is not anti-Semitism. We are highly critical of the state of Israel. That's different. And Luciana Berger is not being loyal to the Labour Party. And what we're seeing this morning is a loyalty pledge going viral on social media, where all Labour MPs are signing up to be loyal to Jeremy Corbyn. So it sounds like things are really hotting up inside the Labour Party.
Yeah, and it does feed into that about a variety of issues, you know, anti-Semitism being one of them, and this poll here saying a third of voters believe that Corbyn is anti-Semitic. But amongst Labour MPs, it's about Brexit, it's about this, it's many other things, and we've heard them talking a long time about breaking away. Last week, it did feel different. It felt as if it was more imminent, but I do understand we have said that before.
You keep saying it, but you think something is about to happen.
Yeah, and how many it is, of course, is another issue. Whether it's a new party is another issue as well. They could sit as independents, but I think some of them, one said to me last week that some of us have got to the point where we have nothing left to lose.
That's very interesting. Camilla, let's talk about another big issue all week, really, which has been the behaviour of social media companies. We remember the ghastly suicide case.
Yeah, Molly Russell.
Molly Russell, who was only, I think, 14 years old or something like that.
This is an interview that Charles Hymas, my colleague, has done because we're running a duty of care campaign on the Telegraph, and essentially the chairman of the Media Select Committee, Damien Collins, has said what we need for online is the same as we have for broadcasters and newspapers. We need a regulator. We need a regulator to say, actually, you can't pretend that you're not responsible for the content that you post on your own sites, and if you fall foul of the law, then you should be subject to huge fines, as are newspapers.
Particularly if you're asked to take something down and then don't.
And you don't. And of course, there has been this concern, self-harm videos, videos encouraging suicide, videos encouraging anorexia, and other very pernicious things as far as teenagers are concerned. And I do think it's interesting, you know, being from a newspaper perspective, you often get it in the neck, not least on Twitter, because you're not held accountable. But of course, by comparison to an internet that continues to publish with impunity, respectable journalists, arguably legally, have to be on their best behaviour.
A level playing field is needed. Let's look at another level playing field. Not, says Martina Navratilova, in sport. This is the case of a transgender woman who has not had surgery, so has still got male sexual organs, winning cycling races. And Martina thinks this is unfair, yes?
Yeah, she essentially says, and we've had lots and lots of debate around the rights of transgender women, and she's essentially saying that even actually if you've been through the surgery, that you have a biological advantage over other women. Now others are saying, well, actually the hormones you take change that, and she says, no, hang on, if you're born as a man and or if you're born as a boy and you develop the type of muscles that men tend to have, then that will give you an advantage. And she thinks that it is wrong in order to be able to compete at that level, and that it will be unfair on women who don't have that advantage. And she tweeted, "You can't just proclaim yourself a female and be able to compete against women." I mean, this is a big debate that is rolling on.
We've talked about Twitter. My advice to Martina Navratilova would be not to look at Twitter today, because this is an issue which has gripped huge numbers of particularly young people. The other thing they've been gripped about, of course, this week is climate change.
Well, bunking off school.
Bunking off truancy. Now, what is it? There's a very, very funny piece by Rod Liddle.
Yeah, Rod Liddle's got, so what do the kids want? Climate action. When do they want it? During double maths. But can I just say, right, all these politicians who are getting so angry about these kids, anyone with kids and anyone else probably knows that Friday before half term is not an educationally enriching day at school. And one of the most educationally enriching things kids can do is get involved in political action on the biggest issue and the biggest crisis facing our planet.
They are right about this.
At the moment. They're really right. And the idea that, politicians, and a lot of them were Conservative, coming out and saying, well, they're acting truant on the Friday before half term, I think totally misses the point. And for a party that needs to attract young people, I feel like they should have taken a different attitude.
They came out so forcefully, actually, cabinet ministers doing that. I was surprised.
You have to make sure the kids are safe. Okay. There was an argument to say some of them had been running off to protest and no one knew where they were, which is slightly concerning from a safeguarding.
But at least they're engaged.
We're down with the kids, which you can't always say about the Andrew Marr show. Thanks all very much indeed. And so to the weather, there was a strange, exhilarating, sappy, bouncing aroma in the air this week. If you inhaled it deeply enough, it almost smelt like spring. Over to Matt Taylor in the weather studio.
Thank you very much. And Jen, there's more than a whiff of spring in the forecast for this coming week too, as there is out there at the moment. Lots of sunshine across the eastern areas, but in the west, here we've got rain spreading in across Wales, parts of western England, turning showery now in Northern Ireland, but some heavy rain in western Scotland. That's a cold front, weather front, which will work its way northwards and eastwards through the day, fizzling out to nothing more than a few light showers this afternoon as it hits towards parts of the south and east Midlands, south east, East Anglia, and across parts of Lincolnshire. It means western areas brighten up, bit of a stiff westerly wind though to go with it, and temperatures peaking in the next few hours, probably up to around 15 degrees in one or two spots. But even this afternoon, once that cold front's gone through, the sunshine is out, it will feel quite pleasant, temperatures above where they should be. Into tonight, the weather front is still just going to linger across East Anglia and South East. Could be some drizzle here. A few showers in the west, especially across Scotland and Northern Ireland, where the winds will strengthen, touching gale force across the Western Isles later. And the breeze should help keep temperatures up, down into low single figures in one or two spots for tomorrow morning's commute. But tomorrow, showers across Scotland, Northern Ireland throughout the day, one or two to western parts of England and Wales, good bit of sunshine in between. But our weather front towards East Anglia and South East is still there, could reinvigorate, produce a little bit of rain later. Temperatures lower tomorrow than they have been through the past few days, but just the temperature trend here in Chester, for example, shows temperatures are on the up through this week, back into the mid, if not high teens in one or two spots. Spring may have actually sprung. Back to you, Andrew.
Well, that's not bad. Now, Airbus is the world's second largest aircraft manufacturer. It employs 14,000 people here in Britain, mainly building wings. Its German CEO, Tom Enders, recently blasted Brexiteers and hinted the company might decide to switch investment away from the UK. Meanwhile, last week, Airbus announced it was ceasing production of its huge super jumbo, the A380. Katherine Bennett is the UK boss of Airbus, and she's with me this morning. Welcome, Katherine Bennett. Can I start off by talking about this super jumbo and the cancellation of that? That is, to be clear, nothing to do with Brexit.
Nothing to do with Brexit. It was a huge icon, and we're very sad to have made this decision. Big economic business case we had to look at. But as you said, 14,000 people designing and building those wings, and we're sad to see it go. But there's a great future. We've got lots of other products that airlines are ordering we're very positive about.
So does the demise of this beautiful super jumbo mean that we're actually going to see job losses as a result in Britain?
In the UK, we employ directly about 200 working on the A380. Now, those jobs will have plenty of work to do, actually, because this aircraft is going to be flying well until the 2030s.
Still needs its wings.
Absolutely, still needs those wings and the landing gear and the fuel systems. So there's plenty of work to be done, and those people will go across to work on some of our other products.
It came out just after the financial crash of 2008, a difficult time to be selling a new product. and there were issues about the hubs that it was using and so on. For people who travel a lot or are interested in aircraft, what is the next big thing for Airbus?
So we're looking forward. So we have the A350 aircraft, which has already been launched and flying, fastest selling aircraft in aviation history. We're very proud of that. A lot of the work we did on the A380 has been transposed onto the A350. So, for example, composite wings, which will reduce fuel consumption, etc. So that's what we're looking forward to. And also perhaps some electric aircraft projects into the future.
Very exciting. Can I turn to Brexit? Inevitably, we were going to talk about that. Tom Enders, just to remind people, the chief executive, said, if there is a no-deal Brexit, we at Airbus will have to make potentially very harmful decisions for the UK. The UK's aerospace sector now stands at a precipice. What are those harmful decisions?
Well, it's quite clear for all of us the clock is ticking, and Airbus, like many, many other businesses, have spoken up. What we're concerned about is the prospects of a no deal. There's no such thing as a managed no deal. It's absolutely catastrophic for us, and this is why we wanted to speak up. And our CEO has felt it important to speak up on behalf of our sector, which is a really important contributor to the UK economy.
You've got 3 major plants in the UK, and as I say, 14,000 people working here. Are you saying that if there is no deal, ultimately you'll have to leave Britain?
So what we're saying is that some difficult decisions will have to be made if there's no deal, and we're very optimistic that there won't be no deal, and that's why we're speaking up. If there's no deal, we will have to look at future investment. So we've got plenty of work to do in the forthcoming months and years, but it's the future decisions, and that's what I want to do. I want my country to be a good place to invest.
How many years of production do you have if there is a no deal?
So we've got a huge, huge backlog of order, 9,000 aircraft to produce, so it'll be many, many years yet. But there will be decisions coming down the line in the next few years where my company will have to look seriously at investments.
So it's things that would have been built in Britain that will be built somewhere else, rather than removing jobs that are here at the moment.
Exactly, and actually new technology. One of the things we're very proud of is the design and the technology work, the innovation that we have here in the UK. And European collaboration is so important for future technology. Aerospace is an international business, and I want the UK to remain part of that.
Back in 2016, at the time of the referendum, Airbus said, we're not going anywhere. What has changed your mind?
Maybe it's the catastrophe we see happening. For me, we need our...
By catastrophe, do you mean the sort of political failure to get a deal?
Absolutely. It's time for the politicians to come together and help us not have this uncertainty. And we, as business people, feel we need to speak up and ensure the facts are out there on the table.
Can I ask for a few more facts, if I may? How much money have you spent on no-deal preparation so far?
So we've got a very good working group at Airbus, which has been working for several years on all the sort of intricacies of that. We've spent tens of millions of euros on readiness, for example, stockpiling parts, looking at the IT systems, working about how our employees will be able to cross over the many 80,000 journeys they make every year as part of our integrated European business. So a lot of money. I'd much rather that money was spent on hiring more apprentices, of which we have 150 being trained in our factories this year in the UK. Our great skills, our engineering skills, increasing the number of women working in our business and all those kinds of things. I'd rather our money was spent on that.
And what are you stockpiling at the moment?
So it's parts for our wings. We've had to instruct all our suppliers to ensure they're ready for, if there is no deal, for what might happen on the 1st of April. We are a long-term business and we're good at doing what we do, and our suppliers are excellent, so they're getting ready.
So are you thinking now about what production will have to be relocated and where will it go?
So we're preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. And really, I seriously hope that difficult decisions like that won't have to be made.
But will you be presumably going back to Toulouse, which is where your main hub is?
We have sites all over the world now, not just Europe, but Toulouse and Hamburg and China and America, Spain. I mean, there's many other countries would dearly love aerospace in their countries.
And of these 14,000 people working for you at the moment, how many would have to move abroad if it was the worst case scenario?
So that would be many, many years down the line. As I said, we've got a huge order backlog, so there's plenty of work for our valuable UK employees to work on for now.
And what about investment long term? That's what you're really concerned about.
Absolutely, and one of the most important things in aerospace is we're very collaborative, so R&D investment, that's what we're looking at, whether the company will continue to do that. And we're working closely with the government. We had an aerospace sector deal announced last December, which really does give some optimism, but investment's not going to come if we don't see the right climate.
Have you already lost any investment, do you think, as a result of what's happened the last couple of years?
Maybe fortuitously there hasn't been any major decisions, but there may be down the road, and I know other companies have had to, so aerospace investment's gone down considerably this last year across the board.
Now, Katherine, there are people watching this who think you are part of Project Fear, that you have become, as it's in a sense, the government spokespeople for the worst outcome possible, that you've been drawn into a political game here.
We think this is such a monumental thing that businesses have to speak up. We rather say that it's dawning reality. We need to get the facts out there on the table.
Let's have a little look. You'll have seen this clip already, but here is one Conservative Brexiteer, Mr Francois, responding to Tom Enders' letter to Parliament about the dangers of Brexit.
He can bully British MPs how to vote. He's going to be sorely mistaken. My father, Reginald Francois, was a D-Day veteran. He never submitted to bullying by any German. Neither will his son. So if Mr Enders is watching, that's what he can do with his letter.
Well, my uncle was a veteran as well, but that's the kind of anger that this is producing among Tory MPs. Are you as a company prepared to ride that?
Mr Francois is entitled to his views, and actually perhaps as historians maybe it's worth thinking about the history of how Airbus started. So the UK were right there at the beginning of Airbus's foundation. We're celebrating 50 years, so let's hope that we can move on from these debates and get working again.
I'm going to be talking to the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, later on. One of his plans is to take 10% of shares from all big employing companies, certainly including your one, and give that to employees. Would you do that? Would you be happy with that?
Well, we'll obviously talk to a Labour government if and when they get in power, and we will look at that option then.
All right, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Now let's hear from Joe Coburn about this week's Politics Live.
Parliament isn't taking a break for half-term because of Brexit, and neither are we. We'll bring you all the latest developments, and we'll be talking about lots more besides Brexit. That's Politics Live on BBC Two, tomorrow from 12:15.
Ever since the suicide of the 14-year-old Molly Russell, British politicians have been talking about forcing the social media giants to take down images enticing children to self-harm. But will anything really change? The Culture Secretary, Jeremy Wright, flies to California tomorrow to meet, well, let's ask him, are you going to be meeting Mark Zuckerberg?
I hope so, but it will be up to the companies themselves to decide, obviously, who they want to put up to talk to me. But what I'll be talking to them about is what the UK government thinks is necessary to keep its citizens safe. Now, I want to make sure that what we put forward is effective in that regard, and I'll be talking to these companies about how we do that. But I'm not asking their permission to do it. I'll be talking to them about exactly how we make it effective.
But you don't know at this stage who you're going to meet?
Well, I believe that we will be meeting very senior people from all of the companies that we're going to talk to, and at the moment I expect to be speaking to Mark Zuckerberg as well. But in the end, it's up to those companies to decide how much they want to engage with this process. But the British government will come to its own conclusions about exactly what's necessary to keep our citizens safe. And there's no doubt that we can't any longer, I think, rely on the internet companies to do this for themselves. We need to take action as a government, and we intend to do that, but I want to make sure we get the design right.
Well, let's look a bit at what that might mean. Damien Collins, your colleague who chairs the Culture Select Committee, has said that basically there needs to be a new independent regulator, which does for social media platforms what other regulators do for newspapers or indeed broadcasters. Do you agree?
Well, you will understand, Andrew, if I don't set out for you exactly what's in the white paper now.
Why not?
To make sure that, because I want to make sure that the design is right. And let me tell you why. I think it's very important in the interests of Molly Russell's family, whose death you mentioned earlier, and in the interests of all those many parents, of which I'm one, by the way, who worries about what their teenagers may be doing online, that we get the design of this system right. In order to do that, I have to make sure I've worked through the questions we need to ask ourselves, the mechanisms we need to put in place, and the consequences that will follow if online companies don't meet their responsibilities. When I've worked all that through, I'll set them out in a white paper, and then we'll want to hear what people have to say, and I'm very happy to talk about it more at that stage.
But if you can't talk about a regulator, presumably you can tell me whether or not you believe that criminal sanctions are appropriate.
Well, look, what I can tell you is this. I think what's important is that we have a system in place that sets out clearly what the responsibilities of online companies are, sets out how we expect them to meet those responsibilities, and sets out what will happen if they fail to do so. And the white paper will do that.
Criminal sanctions?
Well, we will consider all possible options for penalties. And it's important, I think, that those companies that we will be talking to and those companies from whom we'll expect a positive response to this understand that there are meaningful sanctions available to us if they don't do what they should. That's what I think we owe the families of those teenagers.
A lot of your predecessors have come on programmes like this and said much the same thing, and nothing has changed. How will you be judged as a success or failure in this?
Well, I think we'll be judged by what we produce and how it works, and that's one of the reasons I'm taking my time over it. I make no apologies for that. I think what people want to see is a system that will work. So that means making sure that we have thought through the design, making sure we have thought through the penalties, making sure we have thought through what agency should be responsible for holding these online companies to account. Because when we've developed this proposal and when we've seen it operate, that's really how we'll be judged, whether it in fact succeeds in making the internet a safer place, because that's what people expect of us.
All right, Brexit question. Is it still the government's position that the withdrawal agreement needs to be reopened?
Well, we've made it very clear, and Parliament's made it very clear, just as importantly, that changes need to be made to the Northern Ireland Republic
I've asked you a very
Ireland
specific
backstop.
question, Mr. Wright, and the Prime Minister has said what she's talking. This is what she told the House of Commons. It will involve reopening the withdrawal agreement. Is that still the case?
Well, the withdrawal agreement sets out the current arrangements for the backstop. So inevitably, if you want to change the arrangements for the backstop, then we need to address what it says. There are a number of different ways, as you know, in which we might do that, and those are the conversations the Prime Minister's having at the moment. But there's no lack of clarity.
You won't say that you want to you insist on reopening the withdrawal agreement.
Well, I think what's obvious is that Parliament, and I think probably people well beyond Parliament, are concerned about the potential indefinite nature of the backstop.
I understand all of that. There is a very specific issue. Will you reopen it or not?
We've got to do something about that. If this is the only way of doing it, then that's the way we will pursue. If there are other ways of doing it that are just as effective, that perhaps we haven't yet explored,
you think a legal letter or a codicil or something could be as effective?
Well, as I say, I don't think it's the mechanism that matters, it's the objective. If you can get to a place where the potential longevity of the backstop, the potential that the locked backstop lasts forever can be adequately dealt with, that's what we're all seeking to do. That's what Parliament's been very clear that it wants. It will back this deal if we can do something about the backstop. The mechanism is what we're discussing at the moment. But Parliament needs to give the Prime Minister the space to go and have that conversation with Brussels, to see what we can achieve. And if we can do something about that, then I think it's very clear that Parliament will be prepared to support this deal. Very important that it does so, because as you've just been hearing from Airbus and as we heard from others, getting an end to the uncertainty we have at the moment is fundamentally important. Getting a deal will achieve that, and that's what we should all want to do.
Were you worried about what you heard from Airbus just now?
I think we've all been worried about what we've heard from businesses that are concerned predominantly about uncertainty, and that word was used this morning. The biggest employer in my constituency in Warwickshire is Jaguar Land Rover. They're concerned about the same thing. But actually, they've issued an email to all of their employees saying, please write to your Member of Parliament saying, please back this deal so that we can put an end to that uncertainty. We are all in favour of ending uncertainty. The only way to do that is to resolve this question either by staying in the European Union, which is not something that I believe is in accordance with what the people have decided they want in the referendum, or by achieving a deal. And it's achieving a deal that we are entirely focused on.
OK, another issue. President Trump has said this morning that Britain, like other countries, has a duty to take back Islamic State fighters and put them on trial and deal with them ourselves, or he will release them. What's your response?
Well, as you know, Andrew, I spent 4 years as Attorney General.
That's partly why I'm asking
which is why you're asking me. And I think it's clear that if you're dealing with a British citizen who wants to return to this country and they're not a dual citizen, so their only citizenship is British citizenship, then we are obliged at some stage at least to take them back. That doesn't mean that we can't put in place the necessary security measures to monitor their activities and make sure that they are not misbehaving. It doesn't mean either that we can't seek to hold them to account for their behaviour thus far. But that is a hugely complex problem, and it doesn't just involve the United Kingdom, it involves many other countries too.
It's also a sort of moral and human problem. Let me ask you about Shamima Begum, who's very heavily pregnant.
Yes.
As a former legal man yourself, is her baby British?
Well, I think that is a difficult question, as you said. It's not straightforward. But what really matters, I think, is to determine what should happen instantly and urgently to her, because we do have to be concerned about the health of that baby. We have to be concerned about her health too. But in the end, she will have to answer for her actions. So I think it's right that if she's able to come back to the UK, that she does so. But if she does so, she will do it on the understanding that we can hold her to account for her behaviour thus far. I think that's the right way to do this.
You're not going to help her to come back. In other words, we're not going to send British officials to the camp to get her back.
Well, I think that's a very different question. What I do think is that British citizens who only have British citizenship are entitled to come back to the UK. That's a matter of international law. But as a matter of international law too, and domestic law potentially, people also have to take responsibility for their actions, and she will be no exception to that.
Back to the culture brief. Do you think the BBC should be responsible for honouring the Conservative Party manifesto when it comes to over 75-year-olds and licences?
Well, it's not so much honouring the Conservative manifesto, it's honouring the arrangement that was made in the Charter Review of 2015 when the BBC accepted that they would take responsibility for this concession, and that means financial responsibility too. So it seems to me that is an understanding that was reached a long time ago. The BBC will have had many years to prepare for this, and of course have very substantial licence fee income to pay for it. So our expectation is clear. We expect them to continue with that concession.
It is a vast amount of money. The BBC says it's equivalent to the total budgets of BBC Two, BBC Three, BBC Four, the News Channel, CBBC and CBeebies. Would you be prepared to see those go to pay for the licences?
Of course I don't want to see those things go. I expect the BBC to continue to provide a good product to licence fee payers, as they've managed to do thus far, and I'm sure will manage to do in the future. But the figures that you quote, the expectation as to how much this will cost, will, I'm sure, have been something the BBC worked out in 2015, and they made this understanding on that basis. Now, I do think it's important for the BBC to consult, as they have done, to think about all the possible ways in which they might continue to fulfil this obligation. I support them in that. I will wait to see what conclusions they come to, and I will respond as you and others will too. But I do think that what they expected and what they have signed up to was clear in 2015. It's clear now, and we continue to expect them to meet that expectation.
Kids on the street protesting about climate change, heroes or truants?
Well, look, I think it's great to see young people who care passionately about political issues of all kinds. Of course we want to make sure they're safe doing it. Of course we want to make sure they don't lose out on education as well. I encourage enthusiasm. I hope that enthusiasm can be compatible with people getting a proper education.
Heroes or truants?
Well, look, I mean, they could conceivably be both, couldn't they? But I think it's important that we recognise passion. It's important that we endorse that enthusiasm, but we also say to young people, it is important that you get a good education too. School matters, you should stay there for the duration.
Jeremy Wright, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Now then, The Price is one of Arthur Miller's most resonant plays. It's just been revived in London and has plenty to say about our own times. The Price focuses on how one family's fortune plunged after the Wall Street crash of 1929. Brendan Coyle plays New York cop Victor, whose father's died, leaving an attic full of furniture he's trying to sell. He calls in David Suchet's wily valuer, Gregory Solomon, himself a survivor of the Great Depression, to put a price on the family's possession. I called up with both of the actors just the other day.
I'll give you $1,100.
For everything?
Everything. I want it, so I give you a very good price. Believe me, you'll never do better. I want it. I made up my mind. Here. I'll pay you now.
It's that I have to split it, see?
Well, that's all right. I'll make out the receipt for you, and I'll put down $600.
No.
Why not? He took from you, so you take from him. If you want, I'll put down $400.
No, I don't want to do that. I'll call you tomorrow.
All right. With with God's help, if I'm there tomorrow, I'll answer the telephone. If I wouldn't be, I wouldn't.
Don't start that again, will you?
These huge, wonderful plays seem to be cyclical with our own times. History does repeat itself, and this play deals with the depression, as you've said, and survival, and we're about to do it, and that's why I think this play is speaking to its audience today. Yes.
And Brendan, your character, Victor, the New York cop, is struggling to survive. He's selling his family furniture at the time, and there's a phrase he uses at one point: "Some men don't bounce." What does that mean?
Well, he's referring specifically to his father. This is a very autobiographical play for Arthur Miller, in that his father and the father in the play were decimated by the 29 crash, and he couldn't survive. He had no skill set, and there was just no coming back from it, and the family were destroyed by what happened. Gregory Solomon picks that up by saying, well, you talk about bounces, he talks about financial systems that boom and bust, and we bounce back and we bust again. And so in a bigger sense, it's about boom and bust, but in a personal sense, it's about this man's father. It's a very personal thing.
David Solomon is a gift of a role. The old Jewish furniture dealer.
He must have been some sporty guy.
I think if this play was actually written right now and performed as a new play, you wouldn't get away with that. These are Semitic tropes, but also there's elements of caricature.
Yes.
You're enjoying every second of it.
I'm loving every minute of it, and I'm very aware that this character could not be written today. I've always said, with our liberal society, in some ways, we're limiting ourselves in art. This character could not be written, and that's why people don't like doing The Merchant of Venice anymore as well. No, it wouldn't be possible, but thank goodness I've got the chance to play it.
But it's based on an actual man, it's a tribute to a generation of men that Arthur Miller was familiar with.
And he was, of course, Jewish himself. So,
very Jewish, and he used his heritage, he used that.
Yes.
You should be a happy man. Now you can buy her a nice fur coat, take it to Florida maybe.
Right. We'll all be happy now. Give it to me.
So you've got there 100, 200, 300, 400. Take my advice, buy her a nice fur coat, your troubles will be over.
I know all about it. Come on.
So you got there 4, so now I'm giving you 5, 6.
This is a relatively long play dealing with very serious subjects, and the audience is gripped and held all the way through. But I wonder, in the age of kind of TV box sets, whether you think you're worried about the kind of future of the serious traditional theatre dragging people in for a long, serious evening.
It's not that long. 2 hours, 20 minutes. It's a good question. I mean, I don't think great storytelling ever goes away, and it is that. It's very gripping in that sense. It's very funny. We should point out it's probably his funniest play, I think. Yes. I think later in life, Miller said, if you're going to break people's hearts, which he was a master of, we better give them a good laugh along the way.
The plays that still do as well, if not better than most, are plays like this. I get the feeling that on stage, anyway, especially during this play, this audience is hungry for this. I think we can say we're not going to let you down. It's not going to be just brief and quick and advert breaks and all the rest of it. This is serious stuff, and welcome.
You guys are doing this play day after day. Does it feel different? The audience reaction, or certain parts of the dialogue, or the way you're producing lines?
There's different nuance every night. They're more reverent in some moments, they're laughing out loud in different moments. So it changes subtly with each performance. Luckily, we're full, people are receiving it and appreciating it, and that energizes the whole evening.
Which means the price was worth it. Thank you both very much indeed.
You're so welcome.
Thank you.
And The Price by Arthur Miller is at the Wyndham's Theatre in London's West End until the middle of April. John McDonnell, the shadow chancellor, has been in the news for calling Churchill a villain, but his day job, of course, is to prepare a radically different economic course for the country just as soon as the opposition wins an election, and he's with me now. Mr McDonnell, can I start off by asking about the story about Jim Radcliffe, Sir Jim Radcliffe, who's quitting this country to go to Monaco. Now, whatever you think about him, doesn't this sort of point to a wider issue, which is that in a mobile economy, it's very, very easy for very rich people and rich companies to leave the country and take away the tax revenue that you hope to depend on?
No, it's a valid issue, but We have to work on the basis that if you want to live in a society like ours, in a country like ours, which I think is the best place to live in the world, you have to pay your taxes, and it's not asking a lot if you've got a fair taxation system. So that's all we want. So I'm really disappointed, and I'm amazed that this is a super rich person. We're not talking about someone who's on his uppers or something like that. And that, for every penny that is avoided in this way in taxation, what does it mean? It means actually the NHS doesn't treat patients as well as they could. It means our children don't get the full investment in their education, and it means less safety on our streets. I just appeal to people like this. So look, this is a great country to live in. Just make your contribution like the rest of us.
Let's move from the individual to the wider picture. You have called the prospect of no deal a national disaster and an economic catastrophe. And you know that if that happens, it's possible that lots and lots of companies will leave the UK, and you will lose a lot of the corporation tax revenue, for instance, on which your plans depend. In those circumstances, do you change your plans?
Well, two issues there. One is it puts even more pressure on us to get a deal that will protect jobs in the economy. And I agree with what Katherine said earlier. It is catastrophic if they try a no deal. So let's get a deal done. That's the most important thing for me. Secondly, whatever we inherit, our plans will cope with whatever challenges we have. And it's that John F. Kennedy quote, you know, when he got elected president, he said the worst thing that happened was that actually the economy he faced was worse than he even complained about during the election campaign. And I'm expecting that, but we'll have the plans in place. In fact, it puts even more requirement on our plans to be brought forward early to tackle the problems that we face.
So we know that the Chancellor has emergency plans, the so-called Kingfisher plans, to slash corporation tax and boost the economy in the immediate aftermath.
That would be a disaster.
But do you have your own version of it, your own plans?
We've laid them out. What we're saying is invest to grow. So we have investment plans, both in terms of what government can do through its government departments, but also through a national investment bank, the same way Germany in many ways did after the Second World War, developing their small, medium enterprises. All of that investment will go in. It means we need that scale of investment to cope with the challenges we'll inherit from the Conservatives.
Emergency budget?
Well, I wouldn't call it an emergency budget. I want an early budget. When I met the civil servants before the last general election, I said I wanted a budget within 8 weeks so we could start implementing our plans rapidly.
It's been reported that in those circumstances, Labour would introduce an immediate and undeclared wealth tax as part of a kind of move to...
No, we've been very open about our taxation proposals, and we will be all the way through. The element of wealth that we included within our last manifesto was a land value taxation we're exploring, not on residential properties, but we'll consult on that in the next few months.
So there'll be no secrets? No. It will all be laid out in the manifesto?
What I did in the last manifesto, I produced, as you know, the Grey Book, which costed that manifesto, identify the funding sources. In fact, we had a debate about it on this programme.
We had a Grey Book.
That's right, we did. I'll do exactly the same this time around. And what I've been saying to all the asset managers, the banks, the industrialists I've been meeting, is the way you'll get security from the Labour government is that there'll be no tricks up my sleeve. Everything we say we're going to do will open and transparent, and we'll stick to that. OK, let's talk. You were talking about avoiding no deal, and your main offer has been to the Prime Minister, here is our version of a Brexit deal with a customs union and so forth. She has quite patently said no to that already. Do you accept at this stage?
That's a goner?
No,
you think
I think it will come back. We'll see what she brings back. What we've been saying to her very, very clearly, and Parliament has said this as well, that we need now to have a serious discussion. It must be by the end of this month. We've put our proposals on the table. We're willing to negotiate around those. They're the basic of what we think could secure parliamentary approval. But she has to start negotiating as well. We've been waiting for 2 years before that phone was picked up. It's been picked up in the last couple of weeks, and we're engaged in that.
But so far, I think she's rejected it twice in Parliament this week alone. Yeah. And one reason might be because it's a rule-taking version of Brexit. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn said recently in Coventry, he said Labour would not countenance a deal that left Britain as a passive recipient of rules decided elsewhere by others. That would mean ending up as mere rule takers. And yet, when you look at your current proposals, when it comes to the customs union, when it comes to close alignment with the single market and the rest of it, that is in effect your vision. It is Britain as rule takers.
No, it isn't. It's a Britain engaged in a negotiation with the European Union in which we can establish structures for on the single market, which close alignment, but joint institutions as well. It means on the customs union, having a say in future trade deals, which reflects the balance and scale of our economic contributions to Europe overall. all.
On that, what kind of say? Because the EU is absolutely clear that it won't give joint discussion.
Well, it's interesting because Mr Barnier and others have welcomed our proposals, and he's welcomed them, I think, on the basis of negotiations. So that's one of the elements we'll want to negotiate.
But they're not going to reopen the Treaty of Rome to help you, are they?
They don't have to. They can use existing articles to do that.
And the Austrian foreign minister on the show last week said this was cherry picking and more or less dismissed it.
All negotiations are give and take, and the issue that we've put, and I said this on your programme before, the problem with the Prime Minister's negotiations was it never really was based upon mutual interest or mutual respect. It was about banging the table and walking away. That's not what we're about. That's why we want no deal ruled off the table.
Do you want a say in trade deals in the future or a veto?
A say, and we want to elaborate in those discussions that we have with our EU partners exactly what that means, the structure for that, and the institutions that we need to establish to enable that to happen. That's part of the negotiations.
Going back and thinking about the motion passed at the Labour Party conference, we would expect by now that people like you would be openly calling and campaigning for another referendum. Why is it not happening?
No, let's go through the phasing of all of this. We said we will reject any proposal that has an impact on jobs and the economy, which is deleterious. That's what we've done. We've said we will try and seek a deal that will protect jobs and the economy, and that's what we're doing at the moment. We've also said if we can't get that, our view is we should have a general election. If we can't get that, keep on the table the option of going back to the people in a public vote.
I'm getting bored of this table. There's always this table's there. It's always on the table, and it's now quite close to time to take a decision because the election, unfortunately, from your point of view, has slipped away from the table and all the rest of it. We are much closer to no deal.
I'm not giving up on a general election, but you're right. Now's the time. We really are at the end of the line now, and we're saying to the government, you've got to come back with a realistic deal. If it doesn't fly within Parliament, yes, the option of going back to the people has got to be there.
By the end of this month, we have a motion going down by 2 Labour backbenchers calling for a referendum. Will John McDonnell be supporting that motion?
Well, the one I think you're referring to is Peter Coyle and Phil Wilson. I met Peter and Phil last week. What they're saying is if Parliament does agree some form of deal, why not have a confirmation referendum after that? Well, we'll look at that. We'll look at that in the debate over the next week.
Because a lot of people feel that, you're running down the clock because ultimately, as the Labour leadership, you don't really want another referendum.
Well, that's not the case because for the last 2 years we've been saying to the Prime Minister, negotiate with us, pick up the phone, talk to us, and that hasn't happened until the last fortnight.
Clive Lewis, who is a close colleague of yours, a comrade, a member of your team. He's a member of your team. He says that he fears that what we're doing now is we're helping to facilitate a Tory Brexit, and the ramifications for our party, I think, will be severe.
Well, he's right. I think if we were in a situation where we allowed a deal to go through and didn't oppose it, which would undermine our economy, be catastrophic for jobs, he's exactly right. And that's not what we're doing. We're opposing what the Prime Minister is bringing forward, and we're saying we need a deal which will protect jobs, and we've laid out our deal which we think could. Now, if it can't...
But if you can't get that, and the Prime Minister is, to say it gently, a stubborn person on this,
well,
you're probably not going to get it, so you're going to have to go for a referendum.
Well, let me just say this. I don't think the Prime Minister is just stubborn. I think she's floundering. And we're in a situation now where Parliament is literally taking it out of her hands and saying Parliament's got to agree this. So we're part of those negotiations in Parliament to see what sort of deal would be acceptable to us. And if not, we've said option on the table will be to go back to the people.
I quoted you one comrade. Here's another comrade, Len McCluskey. He says that having another referendum threatens the whole democratic fabric on which we operate. In reality, it's not the best option for our nation.
Well, he's saying it's not the best option because he's saying that basically you'd only go back to the people in extremis if you can't get a deal agreed through Parliament, or if any deal you thought wasn't going to protect jobs and the economy, you'd have to go back to the people. And I think that's right.
You've been in this game for a long time. You can hear the creaking of the coming split coming inside the Labour Party. There's endless muttering, endless briefing, and of course, so far, nobody actually does anything, but getting quite close to the moment when they might well do so.
Don't see why there's a need to. I really don't see why there's a need to, because on all the issues that people have raised as the potential for a split, we're dealing with. For example, they're saying on Brexit, well, we're holding the party together on Brexit. Those are saying, well, we'll split if we don't get a people's vote. Well, we've still kept that option on the table, and it might come about. Why split over that? That's ridiculous.
And then there's all the anti-Semitism stuff. Do you regret slightly the tone that you used with Luciana Berger last week? You appeared to be demanding a loyalty oath from her.
No, if you listen...
she's a pregnant
woman.
No,
I certainly didn't. If you look at that interview, listen to that interview very carefully, the first thing I said is if anyone's attacking Luciana, if they're putting up no confidence motions on the basis of that, of her raising the issue of anti-Semitism, it has to be condemned. That's the first thing I said. And then I saw tweets were saying it's because she was interested in splitting the party. I said, well, if that is the case, all Luciana has to do is say that's not the issue. And I don't think it is the issue for Luciana. And I said then, party members then should come together and campaign with her. It wasn't asking for a loyalty threat. I've supported her. And I've said very, very clearly that what we've got to do is work together to overcome this. And that's what... It's almost become an mission for me within my politics now.
Speaking of tweets and loyalty pledges, there's a huge number passing around Twitter this morning and other social media. I think you've signed this as well. There is now, I think we can see it, there's a tweet going up saying, I pledge to work for the achievement of a Labour government under whatever leadership members elect, and I accept that a Labour government is infinitely better than any other election outcome, and people are signing it.
That reflects what I've been saying since I first joined the Labour Party, and even when I had my strongest disagreements with Tony Blair, I still said I will always work for the election of a Labour government.
Isn't the timing of this just a little bit provocative, given that you know there are people on the edge?
Well, no, not at all. People wanted reassurance from all of us that we're Labour through and through. And I think even some of those names that have been mentioned about thinking about leaving the party, I think they're Labour through and through as well. And I don't show any need for anybody to split from the party.
If a dozen or so people did, they're not going to threaten the Labour Party as an organisation, but presumably the danger from some perspective, somebody like you, is that they stand in enough marginal constituencies to stop you getting into government.
It would be like the 1980s, because my constituency in Hayes and Harlington, we had a Labour MP who joined the SDP, and we lost the seat to the Conservatives. And it basically installed Mrs Thatcher in power for that decade. That's the last thing. I don't think any of the people who've even been mentioned around this split would want that.
Now, the other issue that's been talked about a lot this week, of course, is the anti-Semitism problem. Has Labour got a no tolerance for anti-Semitism policy?
Yes, we have.
The reason I ask that is we've now seen the figures, 146 cases of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. It's got a written warning response. That's 146 examples of tolerance, surely.
What we've said is, and I'll just give this example, shall I? Naz Shah was my parliamentary private secretary, and she made some statements which were anti-Semitic. She immediately, once it was pointed out to her, to give her due, she immediately recognised it, apologised, went through what was effectively almost a training exercise, visiting synagogues, meeting with the Jewish community. Now she's held up as a shining example of how you acknowledge what you've done, apologise, and then learn from it. That's what we need for a lot of these cases. But where it's intolerable, where it's repeated, I was on this programme, I said before, not only should we kick them out of the party, in my view, they should be life bans as well.
You're not kicking out many people.
We're not fast enough, and that's why Jenny Formby really, she's doubled the staff, brought in a QC that will give us proper legal advice so we don't lose any cases, and is speeding through it. And also she's suggesting reform. She's multiplied the number of committees that are dealing with it. She's also suggested other reforms. We've got to be ruthless about this. And the reason I'm saying this is because I want to sort this issue out in our party, because I want us to be contributing to tackling it in wider society. I've said this on your programme. I don't want to live in a society where Jewish graves are daubed and where children go to Jewish schools after our protection. We've got to tackle that. It's appalling.
Let me ask you about something else. It's also appalling. Shamima Begum. There are reports now that she's had her baby out in the camp. It's a very difficult moral story. It's a very complex story. At a kind of human level, what is your response to her request to come back to this country and have her...
My view is this, and it deals with all these cases as well. We have to judge them on their individual merits. I know she was officially a child when she went off and joined ISIS or supported ISIS, etc. What we need to do is recognise that, but also on all these cases, we also have to do a risk assessment. And the most important thing is if we are bringing people back, we put the protections in place so the rest of society is protected from it.
And President Trump is saying at the moment that we should take back all of the ex-British fighters, put them on trial. That's a very, very big security and financial question for the UK.
It is, but we have to make sure we respond to our international duties of bringing war criminals to book, and we'll make that contribution. Now, whether that's collectively, and it's The Hague, or whether it's bringing them back here, whatever, we've got to step up to that responsibility. I'd rather they were under lock and key than they were somewhere else, potentially a threat to this country.
John McDonnell, thanks very much indeed for talking to us today. That's all from us. Until next week, goodbye.